In this video, I'll explore ChatGPT and Google Gemini for web development. Rather than asking these tools to build a full website, which I've found can easily be off the mark, or I seem to lose control over, or it just produces kind of messy or bloated code, instead, I often like to take a modular approach and ask for specific website sections or features one at a time. So I have this starter file inside of Figma that I'll use as a reference. And I'll explore some strategies for using these tools to implement this design with code. Examining this design, I can see that I'm planning a website header here that will have the logo on the left and some navigation for menu items and a contact us kind of CTA button on the right. So if I was to gonna code this myself, I would, put a header. So everything is inside of a header. Inside of that is the H1 tag that will have the logo. A sibling of that would be the nav bar, and that nav bar is going to contain a list with at least five list items. And so each of those list items is going to be contain a link. And so using Emmet, I could actually structure this pretty quickly, having a header with an H1 with my iPoint Advisors logo there. I might use image replacement for that or insert an image in that. And then I'm going to have each of these, and I could sort of type the names for these varying sections. This first one being services. Maybe I have one for expertise. Um, one for partnerships, and let's see what my design had here. It had, and then it had the about page, and then followed by this contact us section. Now that contact us section in particular, and I need to put these in the right spot. That context section is going to stand out. So I would give that particular link or LI element a unique class here. So this one might have a particular class assigned to it of, let's say, CTA or something like that. I also saw that I might need a class, like an active class for the current page that I'm on. Based on that design, I had like an underline on that page. So those things could give me access to that. All right, so this was sort of my approach perhaps to designing this. And we could see how this might then play out. I haven't done any of the CSS, which is going to take me a little while, but let's see how this would play out if we prompted the chat AIs to do this. So I'm going to switch over. I'll start with ChatGPT, and I'll simply ask for that website, the HTML for the website header. Let's go ahead and try this prompt. I'm making a responsive website for a company called iPoint Advisors. Generate the HTML for a header that contains a logo and navigation with 5 menu items, and see how ChatGPT responds. I'll send that prompt, and here we go. It's adding a little bit more than I actually had added. I can copy out what it had and sort of paste that back into my design over here to see some of the difference. So it's got the header, and just like I did, gave it a class so that we can reference it, and then started with a container for some of this other stuff. I'm not sure that I need that extra container per se. It began with the logo, which it did make to be a link, and it added my text in there as well as an image for iPoint Advisors as an SVG. So it's already got that started. It also put in the alt tag, which is great, something that I'd actually have to add to my image potentially if I wanted that. So it's got a menu toggle for a hamburger menu button, and partly because I had said I wanted it responsive, it's actually adding in a button for that, which I haven't coded in yet, anything for the responsive design. So that could be thoughtful, something I might need. And it's produced the basic navigation, a nav with nav links, and I could see that each one, it's coding out as if it was a one-page website. So it brought all of that in. It's making guesses as to my section names, and so those are a little bit wrong, but close. One of them is called about, and one of them is contact. Um, and so there's a little bit of extra code that's in here that I might not need, but that's interesting. So and maybe it generates some ideas on how I might even structure things with my own content. So it's pretty solid code. Perhaps it has some extra classes that I actually don't need as hooks, but it would be pretty functional for me to move on from this and style that out. Returning back to ChatGPT, let's try a new prompt that's a little bit more comprehensive. In fact, it actually did add a bunch of CSS here that I didn't even notice, as well as some HTML. So I'd only asked for the HTML, but it generated everything. But I'm going to actually add a new prompt that does ask for more. I'm going to say I'm going to make a website that needs to be responsive for a company called iPoint Advisors, which maybe I'll put in quotes here so it knows that that's the company name. Can you provide the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is needed for a website header that contains the logo site name on the left? Okay, so now I'm getting more specific to my design inside of Figma. And so a navigation menu in the middle with 4 menu items and a CTA button on the right with contact us as the label. The navigation should collapse to a hamburger menu on mobile view. So I'm getting a little bit more specific with my prompt. Let's see how it does with that. And it's pretty fast to generate, which is nice. And so we can see some of the different pieces. It has kind of a similar similar style here. Now it has this logo icon which just says IP, which is interesting. Um, it's doing the hamburger button, and it looks like the lines are being created with these span tags. So last time it generated one that actually just had these in it. Um, so you can get some varying results here, but what I can do is take all of this content and put it together. So I'll go ahead and copy the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript, and we'll take a look. Okay, so copying that content out of ChatGPT, I can see that I've got a fairly well-structured HTML document, honestly. It's got, the basic anatomy of my web page, an external CSS style sheet. I copied the styles over into this styles. This is what it provided. It's made some choices, such as keeping my header position as sticky, which is often something that I like, so that the header doesn't scroll away. It included also the JavaScript that I'd need for the hamburger menu to work. So let's see how well it did in the browser. I've already got this set up in a browser window, opening the file that it generated. You'll see it created this little mini sort of icon logo and title here for me, 4 buttons, and the contact us call to action. And if we were to inspect this and put that into responsive design mode, we could see that there is a breakpoint in here right around the right spot. So it seems to break right there at about 768 or 9. And bringing that into a mobile menu, if I click on the mobile menu, sure enough, it just pops the actual menu open. The one thing that seems to have been missing from this, so I can see this as a problem, is that we've lost the contact button altogether. So you can see the contact us button here is absolutely gone once we go to the mobile view. So that could be an issue that we need to resolve. This is partly why it's nice to test in a modular manner, to try the code and then fix it. Turning to the CSS that it generated, we can kind of see where that mobile styles are applied with this max width here at 768. And that's when it's applying that mobile menu. And I can see that it also said that my CTA button at that point should simply not display. It would display as none, which is interesting. So what if we told that to continue to display, and we save that out? I could return back over to this and refresh. And let's see what happens in the mobile view with that CTA button. This is why they said display none, because it gets in the way here potentially in the mobile view and doesn't sort of integrate back into the menu. Okay, so one of the things you can do is ask it to fix it. So I might trigger this with a new prompt. So I've written a new prompt to ask it for corrections. I say the CTA contact us button, which uses the class CTA button, disappears in mobile view, but I need that button to continue to be a part of the menu. Can you write the CSS so this menu item appears at the bottom of the menu on mobile? So let's see if it can correct this. So it says replace the current media query with this updated button. This keeps it visible on desktop and moves it into the mobile drop-down menu. So here's my new mobile styles, it says. These are what I need to replace. And so I'm going to go ahead and copy those styles and go back in. It says you should also move the button inside the nav element. So now I've got to restructure some of the HTML that I put in there. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to change my mobile styles, and so it asked me to replace these. I'll go ahead and get rid of what was there and replace them with these new mobile styles. It also said that I had to change my source code and move the CTA button inside of the navigation. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, taking it from here and putting it as a part of that navigation. Whether it's part of that main menu, I'm not sure if it wanted me to add it as part of the list or not. And in checking that, it's not including it in the nav links list, rather as its own section there. So what I can do is copy that and make sure that that is how I implement it. So it actually has it as part of the nav, but under the menu as far as that goes. So let's go ahead and save this out. With those revisions, we can take a look at what that would look like here by refreshing. And now that mobile menu is in the right spot, kind of, but it sort of broke it in other places. And so in this case, once we've moved it, it's no longer on the right side. And so this is the troubleshooting that sometimes occurs where it doesn't quite get it right the first time. It says the CTA is aligned right, but it is not. So I'll say the CTA is not aligned right in this new version. Please fix. And it says, oh yeah, it's becoming part of the centered layout. So it had to update the HTML, and then it updated all the CSS. And so now we got to copy all of that stuff back in this particular case. So let's do it. I'll copy it, and we'll see how it did. So in its new version, it actually gave me two CTA buttons, one for mobile and one for desktop. The mobile one it put inside the nav, the desktop one it put outside the nav. This is, for me, a little bit of code bloat, because I know that I could code this keeping actually my mobile CTA as part of the navigation. So I don't really feel like that's necessary. Nevertheless, this particular version might work. Let's go ahead and see what it's done here. I'll refresh, and oops, looks like I broke it. I broke it because I thought it gave me the whole page, and it only really gave me the header. So I'm gonna cut that part and then go back where I had the HTML and then just sort of put in the header elements that were on that page. There we go, resave, and we'll see how this works back in the browser. So let's come back, do a little refresh. There it is. Now my contact is indeed on the right and collapses to mobile and more or less gives me what I want in this other menu. I don't even know that I need maybe such a a standout contact button there, but at least with it being call to action, it remains in the menu. So I've got a starter, and I can start to style this up with my own colors and logo and imagery. It's a good starting place. Let's turn to Google Gemini and see how it does with maybe that same starting prompt. I'm making a website that needs to be responsive for iPhone advisors. Can you provide the HTML CSS? Basically, that same prompt saying that it needs the logo, site name on the left, navigation in the middle, and a CTA button on the right. The navigation should collapse to a hamburger menu. So let's see how well it does. And I can see its response here, and it gives us a little narrative about balancing a clean layout on desktop with functional accessible menu for mobile. It's using Flexbox as an approach. So let's take a look at that implementation. Now, in this particular case, it didn't provide all the HTML as a starter, just the sort of header tag. So that's fine. I'm going to copy that code as well as the CSS responsive styles that it added. It's kind of interesting because for those, it actually set up some color variables, which are nice that you might be able to reuse. And the nice thing about those variables is I could replace those with my brand colors pretty easily, as well as replace font family with my like global font family. So it's adding a pretty simple reset. For example, I always add box sizing border box in my reset. So those things are pretty good. It also did a sticky now bar, generally something that I'd like, and just like ChatGPT, there's classes kind of everywhere and on everything, but it's pretty well structured. These can be useful hooks. They're just more hooks than I really needed. I don't know that I need this div right here at all necessarily. It's putting the logo just in a div, whereas I prefer to have it potentially in an H1 tag. So just a little bit of a different approach. One of the features that it added in the JavaScript I'm noticing while copying stuff in is that it has a feature here so that we close the menu when any of the links are clicked, which can be pretty useful. And so we can go through and take a look at the CS and styles, but let's see what this looks like in a browser. And here we go in Gemini, a little bit more color that they've already added, a little bit of weight differentiation between iPoint and advisors, which is pretty thoughtful, honestly, which word is more important. So even though I'm not adding a logo, it also has a little drop shadow on the menu, so that's unique to this version. So similar structure here. I'm going to go ahead and open the inspector and put it into the mobile responsive mode, and we can see where the breakpoint is added. So it has a little bit different approach in that at least it kept the contact us button. Of course, if our responsive design gets a little bit too small, it's certainly possible. A lot of iPhones are like 375, like it's starting to get a little bit wonky at that size. So some of that responsiveness might not be perfect, but we can take a look at how the menu, there's a little animation on the menu as well, so that's a little different in terms of what it's producing. So pretty nice and a little bit more functional than maybe the ChatGPT version, starting with nothing. So that's pretty cool. One of the things I like about these chat features is their ability to explain elements of the code. So if you wanted to learn something about this, you could always go back to that code and ask, right? So I'm going to return back to Gemini, for example, and let's go ahead and ask it about this idea of the sticky header. So maybe I'll say, what makes the header navigation sticky? Can you explain this? And it's a great way to learn about web development, honestly, is what you want it to do, and it will really talk to you about that. So there's a position property, those are the mechanics. It talks about potentially the need to have a z-index on top, so that menu stays on top of other things while it's sticky. So it's breaking down those elements. So it's floating over the top of the page content, which is why you need that Z index at a really large number. And so it can also talk about, like the difference between sticky and the position of fixed. So really you can learn all about this. And so that, I think that part is really, really useful to query AI about specific features of code. Now, one of the things that Gemini can do is it can actually see. And so you can give it a visual reference as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export out this particular design. So if I export out this design and save that PNG, I'd be able to then go back into Gemini and ask it to sort of develop that menu again with this visual reference. So let's go back over to Gemini and we'll add a file to it. So I'm going to go ahead and upload that file from my downloads folder, and I'll go ahead and add that. And then I'll ask Gemini to examine the file. So my prompt to examine this screenshot from Figma as a reference for the visual styles and content I want for my design. Using this reference, regenerate the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript I would need for a responsive website header. So it will kind of remember what I was doing before as well, and so we can see what it does to improve maybe, or give me a little bit more what I want. It's pretty cool that it's able to, actually sort of examine the aesthetics of it, the different colors, the sort of plum burgundy primary color, the font weighting, and it also is able to actually pull out the actual content. So it puts the real content, services, expertise, partnerships about into the menu items. And so it's got that a little bit better here. So let's take a look at how this revised code plays back out in a browser. So here is that revised code in a browser, and it's got some rollovers, which is kind of nice. It's got the underline for the current page. And if we open up our inspector, we can take a look at the responsive design mode for that to see if that mobile menu is still working effectively. So now I'm getting a little bit of weirdness in the mobile menu where the contact us button, all right, it's got this cool sort of animation on the X. So that's kind of fun. And I like the way that these are playing out, but the contact us button is overlapping the menu on mobile. So I could query that and tell it what's happening. It might be trying to like keep that, but it caught the colors more or less, not quite the underlying color I had, but it's definitely at least more similar. It doesn't have the right fonts, and obviously I put in my own image, but we're on our way. Now, some of the code that Gemini produced is a little bit different than sort of how I imagined. So this down here, this was was kind of how I started imagining my structure. One of the things I realized, probably if I was coding this out, I would probably need to take this particular link out and bring it down here underneath the menu, and I could still give it the class of CTA. The other thing I didn't include in my initial code was the navigation for the button. So I probably would need to have a button tag, and I could see sort of how it was implementing some of this for the hamburger button. So this piece of this is something that maybe I'd want in my own code. So that sort of button tag with with these, if we use the bars, I could also use my own image in there and not necessarily need to use those bars. But potentially this HTML structure is more what I want for this. So I also need to make sure that I take this out, and I'm just going to like put in just some numeral signs here for temporary links. And I'm going to ask Gemini to use this HTML and see if they can restructure its code based on those things. So I'm going to go back to Gemini and say, can you achieve the same goals and a similar layout, but use this HTML for the header. And then I'll paste in my HTML. And let's see if it's able to do that. So here's its response. It does say that a leaner HTML structure is often better for SEO and for simplicity. So maybe it likes my code, but it's often complementary AI, and so I don't trust that. Nevertheless, here's the CSS tailored to that particular HTML. So it didn't provide back the HTML since I provided it, but here's the CSS tailored to that HTML, as well as maybe the JavaScript that would be tailored to that HTML. And so let's go ahead and see if that actually works with my code. Okay, so here's that new code inside of a browser, and so it did change some stuff. The fonts, this is no longer in the middle, but it's got the correct underline, I think, now. On rollover and our contact us button, we can take a look, inspecting in responsive design mode, what happens with the menu. And now the contact button is kind of in the right spot, and the menu sort of opens and closes. It doesn't animate there like it was in the other one. So we're always getting like a little bit something a little bit different each time, but this is kind of bringing us along on the way towards kind of what we want. I'm going to ask for another change here, saying that the version doesn't use the general CSS reset that past versions used. So some of the new versions didn't have that reset. I'm asking if it can add that back and make the font Poppins as the base font. I also say that the menu items do not center, and to revise that so that those items center, but that the contact us button remains on the right. Let's see how it does with that. So hopefully it'll generate some new elements, and it's updated some of the HTML in order to do that, so that we bring in some of our Google fonts into that, and below that it's updated the CSS, adding sort of a simple reset, as well as making the Poppins font family the main font family. Let's implement these changes and see them in a browser. Okay, so here's that new version, and really quite a bit closer now to my original Figma design idea up top. I still, could put in my actual image there for the logo, and otherwise a lot of this is looking pretty similar. And if we were to go into our inspector and take a look at the responsive design mode, it's coordinated the responsive design. We're getting the animated button there again, so that's kind of nice. This breaks down at a certain size, so we would need, in theory, I try to make sure that my content works all the way down to 320. Some of the older mobile phones are at 320 pixels in width, and so that's breaking at that particular place. So I probably need, either an additional media query or to move contact into the menu instead. But I've got this quite a bit of the way there through AI assistance without me having to code a lot. And I'm actually using the HTML structure that I wanted to use behind the scenes for this as well. So I could potentially move on at this point, and maybe start to code this hero section that's a part of that, and see how well it delivers on that. Exploring this a little bit, I uploaded my screenshot from Figma once again and asked it to provide the code for the hero section. And so it provided some of that section HTML and actually did a pretty good job marking it up overall, as well as the CSS. It was talking about how some of that was implemented and where to find the image. For some of the images, I like to put my images in an images folder, but you have to make those adjustments. I went ahead and saved my image out, and then here is that implementation inside of the browser. And so this is what it did to represent that. Now, it's a little bit taller image than I actually intended in this case, but really a pretty good job. It made the Learn More button, request consultation. So it's looking pretty similar to Figma. Obviously, there's a little bolder font than I was using. I was having just a little drop shadow on that. So it's not quite there, but it's pretty darn close. And I could take a look at like what height I want that to be, some of the other elements, and certainly make adjustments to my code to match. Just a couple quick adjustments to the CSS on my part, and it's looking even closer to what I wanted it to look like. And we could see how well it handled the responsiveness as well. So it's doing pretty well, actually, even getting the responsive design pieces for the mobile version of request consultation and Learn More. It's a little weird, the orientation Learn More going to the left. So inevitably with AI, it makes choices I might not make, but then I'm also impressed by the efficiency of this and how fast I can kind of get up and running with some of my code. I really think you still need to be able to code in order to use the AI effectively, and be able to understand what's happening with it behind the scenes. But certainly you can implement designs to code a lot quicker and use it as a tool for building out your efficiency, for learning, etc. So I hope you will explore that so that you can turn your comps to code, and potentially using AI tools for assistance. Good luck.